everybody. My name is James. I'm one of the reference librarians here at QVCC Library, and here I have Heather. See, we had a recording before this, and I was like sure I was going to get the last name, and then I didn't even get the first name right. So we have Robin Mchaelen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when you look at her last name, it looks like Mchaelen, and I was completely off. But I really like how you kind of gave the history of your last name. So just give me a little bit of rundown on that.
So years ago, actually 26 years ago now, when my wife and I first got together and decided that we wanted to get married and have a family, we wanted a family name. So my birth name was Passarello, and her birth name was Lawrence. And there was like no way.
Yeah, you're not hyphenating that.
No, there was no way. And so one day I was reading something and I found this word, Halen. It's an Anglo-Saxon word that means to heal and make whole. And MC, because the only ethnicity we share is Irish. So that was where the name came from, which is very funny. We did that because we knew that we wanted to have children. And now our daughter prefers other names because this doesn't reflect her Italian heritage.
Wow.
And so it's just funny. It's funny how that works out.
That's fascinating. But you do the names that best represent you and who you are. So that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit of why you've come into the library today?
Sure.
What kind of presentation you have for us?
What we're going to do is I want to talk, the reason I've been asked to come in is to talk about gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning, two spirits, same gender loving, pansexual, flexual, not straight, not labeling, straightish, straight so far, straight with options, straight but stuff happens, gender bending, bigender, pangender, agender, asexual, non-binary, and other sexual and gender minority youth. It's like exploring the genderverse.
Yeah, and after hearing that, that's a lot to unpack all at once. So I'm glad you're able to cover most of that.
Right, and actually what I'm going to say is, and we just want to go on to, if you go into the next slide, I'll show you, that I always start with the litany of the language because it's important for people to recognize that the language is changing, right? And how young people in particular are describing themselves and their experiences may be very different than many of us grew up with. Fortunately, we don't have to keep up. We just have to keep open.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I know from my generation and generations before us, there used to be just a very simple vernacular of just like gay, lesbian. And now it seems like, well, I'm hearing from older generations of like, well, I just accepted those terms. What are these new terms? And especially after you just gave the litany of words, it can be overwhelming. And I think a lot of people feel kind of almost shut down.
Right.
Like there's way too many. I can't keep up. I don't even want to try. Right.
And so that's why I always start with by reminding people that you don't have to keep up. All you have to do is keep open. So, I've been doing this work. I've been working with young people for about 35 years. And one of the things I often do is I ask young people how they identify. I don't ask adults because y'all get cranky. But, but I do ask young people how they identify. And then pretty much no matter what they say, I will say something like, "Thank you for telling me that. Tell me a little bit more. What's it like to be a non-binary pansexual femme?" Right? Because even though I might know what all those words mean, I don't know what they mean to this human in front of me.
Absolutely.
Right? And so you don't have to keep up. You just have to keep open. When someone says, "This is who I am," you say, "Thanks for telling me that.
Yeah.
Tell me more about it. I'd love to hear more." And then if you go into the next, I would also remind people that we don't have to agree. We don't have to understand, and we don't even have to accept. All we have to do, we don't even have to approve. All we have to do is accept and respect. When someone tells us who they are, it's our job just to say, "Thank you for letting me know," right? And that I think that if people relax into this and just recognize that we don't have to keep up, we just have to keep open. We can understand to the best of our ability, but we don't have to even understand. We just say, okay. It's sort of like, I'll do me and you do you, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes I feel like there's this pressure of everyone wants to fit into a certain place where they want to, okay, this term fits here, and this term fits here, but it gets a little bit more complicated. I know for me personally, trying to decipher like bisexual versus pansexual, I had a hard time. But as you said, you don't really need to necessarily understand like the technical terms, but just kind of just listen and
Right.
understand where they're
where
coming
they're coming from, exactly. And that different people will explain the difference between bisexuality and pansexuality differently. Some people define bisexuality as people who are attracted to more than one gender, right? And some people define pansexuality as people who are attracted to regardless of gender. But different people describe it in different ways. So, it's okay to just say, what does that mean for you? Or just thanks for telling me.
Absolutely.
Right? And if someone says, I'm trans or whatever, you say, great, what name and pronouns do you want me to use? Right?
Yeah.
So it's just really, it's a lot simpler than people suggest. And I think that what's true about it is that there are not more identities now than there used to be. I think there's just better language. And that for young people in particular, and for adults, that we're trying to find the word that best describes who we are. Sexuality and gender are much more nuanced than many of us grew up understanding. And that people are exploring the nuances. And that for young people, part of an adolescent's job is to develop their identity, right? That's part of their job. So they're going to try things on to see what is the best fit for them. And as new words and new concepts emerge, they might go like, let me see this. Let me try to wear that for a little while. That's not exactly right, but oh, wow, this is it. Yeah. This one fits. And so it may take a little time for people to figure out what's the right fit for them. Yeah. And I think it's also about community. People want to know where they belong and who belongs to them. Yeah. And so, having these nuanced words is about developing a sense of identity and developing a sense of community.
Absolutely.
So.
And I think you're taking such complicated concepts where even the people who are trying to represent them still really don't understand. And, it's kind of an experimenting of these words and seeing what works, might not work, and language. But that's also part of language. Language evolves.
Exactly.
And then what used to not work can now work now, or what used to work then, and that's okay. But some people are like, okay, everyone, here's the announcement. It's this word,
right?
And then and I know that for some people that can be hard to switch those languages,
right?
But,
exactly.
We're trying to be more accessible and trying to give a better understanding, and by understanding, we might have to develop a better vocabulary.
Right, exactly. And I would also say that one of the things that people can do is just slow their roll.
Yeah,
right? Just like breathe. Somebody tells you something and you breathe, and then respond.
Yeah.
We'll talk about pronouns at one point during the program, and the reality is that pronouns are changing. You can't tell by looking at somebody what their pronouns are. And so what we want to do is begin to normalize sharing your pronouns. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Sharing your pronouns when you meet new people, and recognizing that people use a variety of different words, and that it's human to make mistakes, right? We're going to make mistakes. And so when we make mistakes, you make a quick apology and move on, right? But I think it's also like mispronouncing people's names. That if if somebody mispronounces your name and you correct them, and they mispronounce it again and you correct them, and now we're on the 17th time and you've corrected, eventually the message is that you don't care enough to do it. So when it comes to pronouns, what I tell people sometimes is, if you don't know someone's pronouns and you can't, if they haven't told you, you don't know. If you don't know and you don't feel like you're in a situation where you can ask, then default to their name. Right? And then if you have to use a pronoun and they haven't told you their pronouns, default to they, them. Because they, them is, people are less likely to feel misgendered by they, them than if you use he or she incorrectly. Now, if someone's already told you their pronoun is he or she, them is going to be a misgendering, right? But
I think it's fair to say that there's a big difference of being like, I did not know.
Right.
And I made kind of an assumption. I assumed wrong. Now, I would like to know kind of what is your pronoun, as opposed to the person already knows what the pronoun is given,
and
but
then
chooses
not to. Exactly.
Repeatedly. I think that's where a lot of the frustration is coming.
I think that's absolutely true. And one of the ways that I think about that whole process is that people have a wide variety of views and values, right? A whole different range of belief systems, right? And so in respecting other people, the goal is not to challenge somebody else's belief system, but to help them moderate their behavior. And that for schools, universities, and educational programs, part of what we're giving our students are the skills that they need to negotiate a diverse world. Nobody needs help learning how to get along with people who are like them, right? People need help getting along with people who are not like them. And the reality is that the majority of people who get fired these days don't get fired because they don't know their job. They get fired because they can't get along with other people, right? They're causing problems on the job. So that when what we're asking people to do is like, believe whatever you believe. Have whatever values you have, but here's the expectations in terms of behavior. When someone tells you that this is their pronoun, that's what we're going to use. When someone tells you this is their name and this is our identity, this is what we're going to respect. And it's just about your behavior in those situations, not challenging your underlying beliefs or values. And I think sometimes when parents fight back against schools, creating safe environments for everybody, they're misunderstanding the goals of that inclusivity. That certainly the primary goal is to make sure that every student feels welcome, valued, and affirmed, and it has a safe educational environment. But it's also a part of giving the student the skills they need to successfully negotiate a diverse world, right? And I wonder if parents understood that this is a skill, and maybe it's a skill they don't have, but maybe it's a skill that their kid needs.
Right? I mean, it could also be that these parents are feeling like the schools are forcing them to change, as opposed to parents seeing that the school needs to be kind of developing more acceptance and kind of developing this atmosphere. But the way that it might be viewed as is that they're attacking me.
Right.
They're attacking
Right.
my core values.
Right.
Even though in a general sense, they're not really being that affected,
Right.
per se.
And I would also say that schools should be explicit that they're not challenging parents' roles, parents' responsibilities to share their values with their kids. That's a parent's job. But the school's job is to prepare that young person for a successful future. And that those two things should be able to go in concert with each other.
And I really like what you mentioned before of like, this is not necessarily like you must agree to this. It's just that you must be open and just acknowledging this type of coexistence, if anything.
Right.
You don't have to force, whether you kind of accept kind of these gender definitions and norms, is almost irrelevant. What's more important is to just kind of acknowledge that it's here and you just must learn to coexist.
Right, exactly. I would say that's exactly right. Yeah. Let's see what else we got in here. So I do want to identify some of the current environment. That in 2022, almost 300 anti-LGBTQ plus laws were proposed or passed across the United States. The majority specifically targeted trans and non-binary folks, and one of the impacts of that is that there's a model called the minority stress model, and it talks about distal and proximal stress. And distal stress is stress that's out in the larger environment. So if you're a member of a marginalized community, or a community that is stigmatized or oppressed in some way, that the messages that exist out in the world impact individuals in some significant ways. And what we've seen, with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the anti-Asian hate, with the anti-LGBT vitriol that's going on, is that people with lived experience in those identities are beginning to exhibit PTSD-like symptoms. Right? Anxiety, depression, they're constantly being re-traumatized by things that are happening out in the world, where the world is making a statement about who they are. Yeah. Right?
And especially in this era where we are in this digital age of, you really have a hard time of turning it off when everything is connected to the digital world. Wherever you go, whether you're home and you pull up your phone, it's always there.
It's always there. And most people have their phones and their digital technology set up to automatically play videos. Yeah. So it's very hard to escape sort of what's happening. So think about a young person who might be, let's say, a cisgender Black gay boy, right? So he's hearing all of the stuff that's happening to young Black men all over the country. And then he's hearing about all the things that are happening to gay and lesbian and bi and trans folks. There's been a surge in violence. And so he is experiencing these traumas in all different parts of his identity. And I think that we have to understand that distal stress, the stuff that's happening out there, is impacting our students. The impact of COVID in a lot of ways is about the stress of, being isolated, of having to change everything, of losing your support systems and all of these different things. And that is having an impact on risk factors for young people, probably for adults as well, but absolutely for young people. The Trevor Project did a study in 2020, and there were almost 34,000 youth in it. And the level of distress among LGBTQ youth, especially LGBTQ youth of color, was off the charts, just off the charts. 84% of Black LGBTQ youth experienced significant anxiety. That's unprecedented numbers.
Absolutely. And it's hard, when in the digital world, it feels like everything is always heightened.
Right.
And do you feel in the past couple of years it has improved, or if you feel like, we've kind of taken almost a step backward?
I think we've really taken a step backwards. I think that whenever you look at different civil rights movements, there's always movement forward and then pushback, and movement forward and pushback. And right now there's a significant amount of pushback on lots and lots of different groups, and that LGBTQ plus folks are one of the groups who are being specifically targeted. I would say that Black and brown folks are being specifically targeted. Asian folks are being specifically targeted. And the level of vitriol, I've been doing this work a long time, and it's been years and years since I've heard the level of name calling and outrageous things that people are saying. It's been years since I've heard it be this intense. And so, I saw a video last month, I think, where an organization that looks at, the ways in which politics are polarized, and they did a visual representation of the amount of time that Democrats talk to Republicans, and they showed it's a great little video, because it goes from 1958 to 2018, and it shows that people were like, there was like this, that there was lots of communication between the two, to now it's like this.
Yeah.
And there's virtually no communication, and it's just so polarized.
Absolutely.
And I think that is having an impact on everybody.
Yeah, it definitely seems nowadays, especially in the media, that everyone's kind of going to their own corners.
Right.
And they have their own echo chambers.
Exactly.
And it's the cross communication is seems at an all-time low.
Exactly. And I think that that's accurate, and that there's a lot of data to support that. So I do want to do just a little bit of, these are some of the risk factors for LGBTQ youth. The number one, both risk and protection factor for LGBT youth is the response of their families. When their families are supportive, those young people in a lot of ways are not at higher risk than other young people. When their families are rejecting, that puts them in at risk of the social isolation, substance abuse, cigarette smoking correlates with family rejection, homelessness, truancy, sexual acting out. All of those things correlate with family rejection.
And I know a couple years ago, I was reading some studies that one of the highest rates of homelessness are actually LGBT communities. And it kind of makes sense that if their family, which is often viewed as their core safety network, rejects them, where are they going to go?
Right. I also think it's really important for people to understand that one of the things that the research finds is that if this is the risk factor for kids whose families are rejecting, and this is the risk factor for kids whose families are supportive, this is the risk factor for kids whose families are ambivalent. It's not as good as if they were supportive, but it's nowhere near as bad as if they were rejecting, which means that we can work with families. Their initial response is rarely going to be their final response, and that we have to understand that when somebody comes out, when somebody in a family system comes out, the whole family's going on a journey, right? Like it or not, everybody's on that road, and we need to support all the people on that road.
So often we'll see that you might have a family who kind of has dug down culturally of, I've been trained my whole life not to accept a certain type of demographic.
Right.
In your experience, how do you go about even opening that door?
And I think that the first, it starts with empathy and understanding. I'm a social worker by trade. So social work, you always start where the person is. And so you start with, tell me about it. Tell me about what you grew up with. What were the messages? What did you hear? How did you internalize that? What does that bring up for you when you think about your child in this way? And that you show empathy and understanding, and then you provide additional information. And one of the things that you can do is start from the framework, the idea that families can become allies for their kids, that they can do this, that families can figure out how to balance the values they grew up with the love for their child. And I've seen, lots of families find ways to do that. And that Dr. Caitlin Ryan is a researcher out of the Family Acceptance Project at San Francisco State University. And she talks a lot about the behaviors that families do that increase a child's risks of harm, and the behaviors that families do that decrease the child's risks of harm. And that can sometimes become a negotiating tool for family. Like, you loved your kid before you knew, you love them now. And what you want is for them to have a happy, healthy, productive adulthood. It's part of our job to help you see how they can do that in this identity. And that sometimes it's about giving them additional information. It's about giving them other parents to talk to who've been there, done that. And I also think from the clinician's perspective, or the people that are supporting the family, don't make assumptions about the family based on any element of their demographics.
Absolutely. Because
my experience has always been that if I've made an assumption about how a family's going to respond, it has always come back to bite me in the butt. Right? And that, I have seen very religious families make lots of room for their LGBTQ youth. I have seen families that come from cultures that were, being gay is a death sentence, learn to love and accept their LGBTQ youth. So I don't make assumptions about how this family is going to respond when it's their kid. But we need to give them some room to process and to think about, and to mourn some of the loss of who they thought they had, so that they can make room for who they do have. I think it's really important that that mourning and processing that caregivers do not happen in the same room as the kid, right? That they need their separate support, so they're not saying, they need to say some things, they're going to hurt their kid, and the kid needs to not hear that.
Yeah. Very interesting I've never heard anybody talk about kind of the mourning type of concept of like, I've heard like kind of, I've lost a daughter but gained a son, and I've heard that expression before. But yeah, you're right that, you know, and it seems like it's okay for somebody to have that thing, and
Sure. Not all parents mourn that, but lots do.
Yeah.
And that because when your baby's born, you have an image in your head of what their life is going to look like, right? And that the image of a happy life that we have may or may not coincide with the image of a happy life that they have, right? But I think that so we've got all these pictures in our head of what our kids' life is going to be like and what our life is going to be like with them. And as we get older and they get older and they move into their families, we have all these pictures about this.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we've got to mourn that. We've got to move those pictures aside so that we've made enough room for the pictures that are there. And I will also tell you that it has more often than not been my experience that families that have gone on the journey with their kids find that their child's sexuality or gender identity is a gift to the family, that they're able to see the world in ways that they never would have seen before, that it expands their worldview in ways they wouldn't have had access to if their child was straight and cisgender. And that, you know, there's a number of books and articles too that talk about the ways in which families grow and thrive as they learn to accept and value their LGBTQ plus kids.
Yeah, that's fascinating, of taking it almost like a holistic route of like, you know, you understanding your child so intimately is going to be a way of you understanding the world. Yeah,
in a whole different way.
Exponentially.
Right.
And that's fascinating. It's almost kind of a mindfulness exercise.
Yeah, in a way.
That's fascinating.
One dad that I worked with is an artist. And when his son came out as trans, so his son, who was assigned female at birth, finally came out as a boy, because that's who he is. And the dad said that over the process of his journey with his son, he became such a better artist because his thinking was so opened in some new ways. He began to really see the world so differently. I don't know what time we're at.
Oh, yeah. No, so we've been talking for about half an hour.
Okay.
We can still continue for
we can take it for just a few more minutes. Let's just do, I don't know if the people, I'll do the definitions like really quickly.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? And then we'll talk a little bit about allying. So this is a little genderbread person. It has no gender. Gender expression is what the world sees when it looks at us, right? And we make all kinds of assumptions about people based on what we see. But we don't really know who they are unless they tell us. So gender expression is what the world sees. Gender identity is who we are. And we begin to know who we are sometime between 3 and 7 when we develop a capacity called gender constancy. And so one of the things about that, just an example, when I was little, the research says that if you look at somebody and you can't instantaneously tell if you're looking at a man or a woman, and it's just that binary, right? We make an assumption that the person is male. And then we look for feminine overriders. And it takes as many as 3 feminine overriders to override the presumption that the person is male, right?
And regardless of gender.
Regardless of gender. So if we're looking at somebody and we go like, okay, is this a boy or a girl? We're not sure. We're going to start with the assumption that the person is male, and then we're going to start looking for other things that disprove that. So when I was little, before puberty in particular, people often read me as a boy. I don't know why, but I just didn't have enough feminine overriders. And every time somebody said little boy or young man, I felt embarrassed, but I never thought I was a boy. I knew I was a girl, even though they didn't see it. And really, that's the difference between gender expression and gender identity. You know who you are, whether the world sees it or not.
Absolutely.
And then the third level of gender is your body. right? And that's assigned at birth. Some medical provider looks at your genitals when you're born, looks at your anatomy and goes, as long as your anatomy looks the way they expect it to look, they assign a sex and off you go.
Yeah.
And that, along with that assignment of sex comes all these expectations about who you're going to be in the world. But even at the level of biology, it is not as clear cut as simply male or simply female. We used to think that intersex children were very rare.
Yeah.
Now we know that they're as common as red hair, right? Yeah. And so it's not, and in fact, if somebody hasn't had their chromosomes tested, you don't really know if you have just XX or just XY.
Yeah.
Because there's so many variations of what you could have. And there's also variations. There's genital variations. There's chromosomal variation. There's hormonal variations. There's all kinds of variations. And I make that point because even at the level of sex, it's much more complex. And then when you add the psychological understanding of yourself and culture and all the other things that play into it, of course it's more complex than simply men and simply women.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, and once again, I might be incorrect on this, but I remember Jamie Lee Curtis had, you know a little bit about that background?
Right, and that Jamie Lee Curtis was assigned female at birth.
Yeah.
She's intersex, and she chose to that intersex, the choice that they made it turned out to match her identity. But for many intersex children, it doesn't, because they have a tendency to much more frequently make those children female, assign those children female than they do male, because it's easier, to raise. It's easier physically, and that we don't keep track of all the times that we're wrong, so the research is a little challenging in that area because we don't always keep track of that, So it turned out that she was assigned female at birth, and that she identifies as a woman. Some people who are intersex may identify with a gender that's different than the sex they were assigned at birth. Some may identify as transgender. Some may identify in lots of different ways. And some people identify as intersex, that intersex is their identity.
And I think the most important takeaway of that is that it's okay with what decision that person makes.
It's okay for that person to be their authentic selves.
Absolutely.
Whatever that authentic self is.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Great.
So 2 more words. I've been using the word cisgender. Cis is a word that was made up about maybe 10 years ago now. The prefix CIS means matching or on the same side as. And so I'm a cisgender woman. The sex that was assigned to me at birth matches who I am. Transgenders, when the sex assigned to you at birth doesn't match who you are. And honestly, it's just that simple. Right? And just as there's a million ways to be cisgender, there's a million ways to be transgender. Some cisgender people do body modification. Some trans people do body modification. Some cisgender people use hormones. Some trans people use hormones. That's not the definition of where you fit in that, right? It's based on whether or not who you are matches what somebody else said about you when you were born. And then sexual orientation, I think non-binary might be the next image. I forgot. Okay. Yeah, that non-binary, about 34% of LGBTQ plus youth now identify as non-binary. And what a lot of people say about non-binary is people who don't identify as either men or women, but some combination of something else, everybody gets to describe their gender in their own way. And that I've had a lot of non-binary young people tell me that they always knew that they were not this. So whatever they were assigned at birth, that wasn't who they were. But it also felt wrong to assume that just because they were not this, they had to be that, because that didn't fit either. And so understanding that they could sort of be anywhere they wanted on the spectrum, whatever fit for them, just gave them a lot more freedom.
Absolutely. It's, to kind of give an analogy, it's just kind of like, do you wear blue or do you wear pink? And it's like, well, maybe I like both. Maybe I don't really fit on either way. Maybe it's a mixture of the two. Right,
exactly. And you don't like pink because you're a girl or blue because you're a boy. You're like pink because you're a human who likes pink or a human who likes blue. I always tell people that in English, objects do not have gender. Only people do. Right? And non-binary is also not new. It's really, you can do that. It's really old. Right? These are some non-binary images out of history, and that if you do some of the research, you look at the impact of colonization on different parts of the different continents across the world, that many cultures had words in their language and acceptance for and actually roles for people who were non-binary. And then as colonization imposed the concept of heterosexuality and also two and only two genders. So it's an interesting thing that we're sort of reemerging on something that indigenous societies knew, automatically.
Is there anybody in particular here you want to just elaborate more on?
Well, let's see that. So in Native American culture in the U.S., that people who, let me just say this. In virtually every indigenous society in the U.S., they have a word in their language that is used to describe two-spirit. Now, we don't really know if that was gay or trans or some combination because we don't really have the historical records.
Yeah.
But the word two-spirit was created about, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe in the 90s. I can't really remember, but it was created for people. That's an English version of the words like wikite and other words that exist in tribal languages, and most of the time, people who were wikite or two-spirit were valued in the culture and the community. I would say that two-spirit is a term that should only be used by people who are indigenous.
Absolutely.
That anybody else who uses that's really cultural appropriation. But this warrior, that body that they founded, this trans or non-binary warrior, this person is dressed as male but apparently has female body parts. I'm not really sure, but that's over 1,000 years old.
Wow.
And so there's cave paintings.
Yeah.
And that, in India and in Hawaii and in different parts of Asia and in Africa, there's different parts of Africa. There are all of these historical figures, that were non-binary, and we're just discovering them again because really, colonization brutalized people who were different, and so it eradicated any a lot of the records that were associated with that.
And if there are records, a lot of the times they might be modified to a more kind of Western ideals.
Exactly. And then just for sexual orientation is about who you are romantically and erotically, to whom you're romantically and erotically attracted. So one way to think about it is that, well, let me just finish this, that you can be attracted to a single gender, right? Gay, straight, and some of the literature now calls it monosexual. You can be attracted to multiple genders, bi, pan, fluid, multisexual, gynos. I mean, there's all different words. And again, don't have to keep up.
Yeah.
You have to keep open.
Just have to understand.
Right. And you can also not have that you find that you don't have attractions. And so even within asexuality, that's also a spectrum for people. That one way to think about it is that sexual orientation is defined as the genders to which you are attracted. They're outside of you, whereas gender identity is inside of you. So sexual orientation is about who you want to go to bed with. Gender identity is who you go to bed as. I stole that from somebody.
That's a pretty good line. I like that a lot.
We have to. I think I actually said that on the things there. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
Orientation: who you want to go to bed with. Identity: who you want to go to bed as. A trans woman told me that one time, and I thought it was brilliant.
That's a pretty good way of memorizing that.
Yeah. And so just very quickly, 3 steps for becoming an ally. One is to continue to educate yourself. That the most effective form of bias reduction is face-to-face interactions over a period of time.
Absolutely.
That the more you get to know a diverse group of people, the more it breaks down all of the myths and stereotypes that we were told growing up about who people are. And so I put just a short list of videos here that, just to get people started. And there, some are about orientation, some are about gender, some are parents' responses. And that, if you go on YouTube, there's just so much. You might also want to think about joining an LGBT organization. I know that the Pride group on campus hasn't sort of reemerged after COVID, but that would be a great thing for people to do. And to understand that being an ally doesn't mean that you are yourself LGBTQ plus, just that you believe that people should be treated fairly.
We had a previous conversation earlier about, well, if you don't identify as gay, should you still be an ally? And you had a pretty funny story.
Right. That one, a 15-year-old told me one time that she was always getting harassed because she was a straight ally, and she was an LGBT supporter. And people kept saying to her, what are you, gay? Why do you care? And she said, listen, I'm an animal rights activist and I'm not a cat either. And I just thought that was just really smart of her.
It's a great counterpoint.
Right. And then pronoun etiquette, we can show the video if it will show up on the thing. Do you think it will?
I don't know if I sent the audio.
Okay, so why don't we just people can, it'll be on it's on the website, so when they go onto it, they should be able to.
And I'll put the link on the description below on
great.
that, because we are running a little bit out of time,
all right,
unfortunately.
So here's some pronoun etiquettes very quickly. Offer your own pronouns when meeting new people. Hi, I'm Robin. I use she, her, hers. Who are you? Right? Absolutely. Very simply. If you make a mistake, correct yourself, make a quick apology, and move on. Don't make it all about you when you make a mistake. Just move on. If you don't know someone's name, use their pronouns. I think there might be one more on that. And that use of pronouns and chosen name is a risk reduction factor for youth and young adults. It actually is one of the few things that correlates with reduced suicidality for youth, especially in school settings.
Yeah.
Okay. And this, I'll leave you with this. If you hear mean, intervene. Right? I took that from a woman who used to work for the Department of Education, and it was like one of her main thoughts is that when you hear mean, intervene, because if you intervene at the level of mean, it won't get to the level of bullying.
Yeah.
Right? That you say something, when somebody says something, if we don't say something, we have said something.
Yeah.
If we hear something and we don't respond, the message is that what just happened is okay with us, right? So there's all different kinds of ways that you can respond. You can say, ouch. You can say, I feel differently about that. Or, why would you say that? Or what has you say that? Please don't use that language around me. Or I have a different experience or opinion about that. Or even just like, nah.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and I think it's also important to kind of stress that, you're not necessarily getting this person to change their mind.
No, you're just talking about their behavior.
Absolutely.
Right. And that their behavior at that moment was disrespectful. And that's so you're not calling out the person, you're calling out the behavior.
Absolutely.
Right. So I guess we'll end it there. That sounds like a good place to end. Here's some images that if you are a teacher or a professor or, that these are some of the things that you could probably put up in your classroom. I got all these downloaded for free on the internet. If you have a color printer, you're good to go.
Yeah. Good old public domain. That's,
right, exactly.
My favorite thing.
Exactly.
And Robin, where could they find you in case they wanted to reach out?
So, my email is just my name, so it's Mchaelen, Mchaelen @gmail.com. I do have a website, which is Mchaelen.com, but it's not really set up very much right now. So best through email, or there's also my cell. You can always call or text. It's 860-416-0068.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so
much
for coming down.
Thanks for asking me. It was great to meet you.
Really
great talking to you
as well.